again. Good morning to you.
Would liverworts be considered charophytes?
No.
Because I know they were early.
Yes, liverworts are actually plants. So this whole grouping of, they are really called in lab. We just saw there was some of the green algae that we saw in the Protus lab giving way to land plants. Of course, what you're going to find is that with the algae in the water, they had to reproduce in the water as well. So moving to land, the big challenge is how are they going to reproduce on land? And two, how are they going to not dry out? Okay, so those are some of the challenges of moving to land. And you see a word vascular up here. This is a series of tubes or vessels within plants, and primary ones are xylem, which carry water and minerals. Xylem kind of sounds like a Z, it's really an X, X-Y-L-E-M. And phloem are the tubes and vessels within the plant that carry food and nutrients. So really what you have, if you have a tree up here, if this is the tree, the leaves, okay, leaves and so forth, you're going to have water and minerals moving up the soil, up this way. And of course, the photosynthesizers are the leaves up here, and they're going to need the water for the photophase of photosynthesis, because remember, water gets split. Hydrogen goes one way, gets nabbed by NAD, and the oxygen gets released into the atmosphere. Okay, so the water mineral is going to go this direction, typically, and the photosynthesis process is going to produce the food, the sugars, which are primarily going to go this way. They kind of call this a sink. The phloem goes from the top down to the sink, particularly if you're a deciduous tree. And what does deciduous mean?
Sheds leaves.
Shed your leaves, like in the winter, right? If you're a deciduous tree, the leaves have come off, and you go dormant, basically, for the winter time. But the food has to have traveled during the growing season down through the phloem to be stored down here in the root system. So better for that. So when we talk about a vascular system, we're talking about a way to transport water, minerals, and food. Now, if you don't have an actual system to do this, think of it sort of like our circulatory system. And of course, it's also called our cardiovascular system. Okay, what are you going to say about these mosses? What's going to be characteristic of their morphology if they don't have a vascular system in the transition between water to land?
They're going to be lower to the ground.
Lower to the ground, right. They're going to be like right there on top of the ground so that they don't have to transport way, because they can do diffusion, and things of that sort, which are natural passive processes and also some processes. But the bryophytes, which is usually mosses, but then there's also liverworts and hornworts that are in this group too. And these are non-vascular plants. So they're like the lower end of the evolutionary scale, yes. Under what? Under conifers, it also says ginkgo, Gingko. A lot of ginkgo trees around that have claim to fame statement ginkgos, sometimes referred to as the oldest living fossils, because they originally came from China, and their species today is still very similar to the species millions of years ago. And so they give it that kind of claim to fame statement. It's like a living fossil. Ginkgos. So then you get to, and of course, you're going to have spores, which is a reproductive type of releasing spores, and then they fall into the moist earth, and then they germinate, and they produce the plant. Now I'm going to come back to this dominant gametophyte versus dominant sporophyte in a minute. And what is that whole concept under the label of? It's kind of unique. Yes. Yes, alternation of generations. Remember, that's one of the unique processes in plants. Although we do it to some extent, but we don't call it that. We don't call it alternation of generations. That's a plant term usually, where you go through a haploid. Remember, N number is haploid, and a 2N number is diploid. Okay, let me on there. Let me address this. And before we get into alternation of generations further, let me say what dominant means. Not dominant in terms of genetics, but dominant in terms of, oh, there's a moss. I recognize this plant. That's a moss. Oh, I recognize this plant as a fern. The part of the plant that you recognize is the dominant. And then you ask yourself the question, is that the gametophyte or the sporophyte? The moss, the main mossy plant, is really a gametophyte. And then on the back, and then the other part that you don't see. Okay. Spinning wheels here. Okay. So if you have these little leaflets, and this is a little moss, like great artistic drawings, they say, ah, that's a moss. It's low growing, doesn't have a vascular system, but then in a certain type of year, it puts a stalk up, and then it has a top on the stalk. Well, this whole part here is the gametophyte. And this stalk is a sporophyte. Now, with the fern, and you know what ferns look like, right? There are all kinds of ferns. Leaf kind of loosely, they got usually notches in them, and they can be fine pointed, or they can be all kinds of ferns. And in fact, this is a good time to talk about ferns, because if you're buying your sweetie flowers for tomorrow, whoever your sweetie is, because tomorrow's Valentine's Day, all right, note to self, right? A lot of times, if you're buying roses or you're buying something like that, they put some fern in the back of it. And I get so excited as a biology geek if I get flowers and I've actually got a fern in it, and I turn them over and they go, oh, yes, they've got gametophytes on them. They've got spores on them. I love it. Okay. So if you turn the ferny, there's no way I could draw a fern leaf. Okay. And it's really more sharp than this, usually. But if you go on the underside, turn the leaf over, in animal terms, I would say the ventral side, and turn it over, it's got these little brown dots. And those are the gametophyte structures. Okay, so are we clear? Dominant means it's the generation of the plant that you recognize as being that plant. And that it switches between the non-vasculars to the vasculars. So once you get the vascular, the dominant, the plant that you recognize as being that plant is really the sporophyte, which is the two diploid state. And if we were a plant, you would say, and our eggs and sperm would be the gametophyte because they're also called gametes, right? And phyte, remember, P-H-Y-T-E means plant. So in the vascular group, these have different degrees of xylem and phloem, different complexity, but they do have it. These can get a little taller, right? But these still, here's the big thing I should add to this. Okay, group in the back, I'm adding this. Spores. This group right here, vascular seedless, produce spores. Little spore cases. Spores. Then when you get to the vascular division with seeds, the seed is one of the greatest inventions of all time. I think I said that last time, didn't I? I'm repeating myself, that the seed is a greatest invention evolutionary-wise for land plants, because you have not only inside of the seed, which we planted radish seeds, right? Okay, so inside we had the embryo in the seeds, the ones that grew anyway. They had the embryo there, they were fertilized. In plants, first there's pollination in most of these, particularly if you get down to the angiosperms, and then there's fertilization. So pollination is the transfer of pollen from the male part to the female part. Then the pollen grain burrows down to where the ovules are, which are like the immature eggs. And then there's a sperm released that then combines with the ovule. But there's something else that happens that happen in people and or animals, and that is that you have a double fertilization down here for the angiosperms. So there's not just one fertilization, there's a double one. One goes to make the embryo, which is the main star in the seed, and the other one goes to make the food supply for the embryo to live on, and also helps to produce the outer integument, the outer structure. Integumentary system in people is the skin. Okay, so the integument's outer. All right. So that you have an embryo enclosed in the seed, and you've got a full food supply. And all you need primarily is water. And the water then helps the embryo to break out of the seed case. And the first thing that comes out is the root, goes down, provides a way to get those water and minerals up to it, and then the shoot, which are the stems, and then eventually create the leaves, then it shoots up. Okay, once the root system gets laid down. But without a good root system, you can get real philosophical about, are you well rooted in your foundation? Remember when they line up in the middle, they can cross over, they can line up independently, assortment, the paternals on the left or the maternals on the left, and each tetrad lines up independently of all tetrads, and we've got 23 pair of tetrads in humans. So the chance of them lining up the same way twice is 1 in 8 million. And then the other sex the same way, and then random fertilization, that you've got this unique egg combining with this unique sperm to come together to produce a unique being that the person is, as long as they're not an identical twin. So you know how much, do you know how miraculous that is? Do you know how much trouble nature goes to create diverse individuals? And we should celebrate our diversity. We're all different. I know you would prefer to have a room full of people just like me, I know that. But we're all different. Look at all the characteristics. Did I tell you that I really was shocked. I did not know this. About only 2% of the entire global population has one phenotype. Did I already share that with you? Okay, tell me when I do, because I don't want to repeat myself. But do you know what it was? I read it on the internet, so it has to be true. I think this one, it appeared to be fairly reliable source. But do you know what it was? It's what?
Red hair.
Sorry, red hair.
Red.
No, it wasn't. Which I understand why you might say that. It was an eye color. Purple eyes? I don't never see anybody with purple eyes, unless it was a colored contact. No, it wasn't purple. It was actually an eye color. What? Green! I've always hated my green eyes. And I'm like, yes! I'm one of the 2% in the whole world that has green eyes. I really wanted my dad's blue eyes. But now I should celebrate my green eyes. Okay. My point, even though I'm going through this kind of humorously, does nature, particularly with changing environmental conditions, and then we can add the evolutionary part to it too. Does nature favor diversity in changing conditions, or everybody being the same?
Diversity.
Diversity. I mean, the meiotic process is complicated. The shuffling that goes on, all these different genes that get shuffled. And then we have a society that some people think everybody should be the same. Be clones. Would you want to be a clone? We're not clones. We can't be clones because we don't have the molecular structure of clones. We're different. And genes also control behaviors. They control all kinds of things that they may not be all physical, but plants also have genes. Plants also undergo meiosis, the ones, the sexual reproduction with gametes as well. So anyone who knows anything about science at all knows that diversity is favored, unless and your whole goal in life is to make as many of you as possible in the shortest amount of time, and your conditions aren't changing, then you stay asexual. And then you have clones, colonies, right? Colonies of bacteria.
Their sole purpose is to reproduce, then why are they here?
Well, because they play important roles in the whole cycle thing of life. Like some bacteria are decomposers, we need decomposers. What if nothing that ever died, including plants and algae and all that, just always stayed, their bodies always stay there? But we have even fungi that help decompose. We have bacteria that help with decomposing. They're all important in the scheme of things. In fact, I just read another article yesterday on the internet. Of course, we all know that's true. But no, this one was legitimate too. That, and I think I mentioned this to you before, that 50% or more of our immune system is located in the gut. And the majority of that is regulated by the type of microbial growth you have in the gut, which affects behaviors, it affects all kinds of things. Which kind of, those people, if you know people who have IBS, irritable bowel syndrome, you know that if you get upset, what's the first thing that gets hit? You have to go to the bathroom like right now. And it becomes critical. Or even colitis and those more serious conditions of the colon. So there is a direct link between your brain and your gut. We are going to be talking animals here. We're getting to animals eventually. But vascular seed plants are divided into two main groups, gymnosperms and angiosperms. Gymnosperms, by the way, when you went to high school and elementary school and so forth, where did you usually go for PE, or where did you sometimes go for assemblies? What was the old name for that place?
Gymnasium.
What was it? Well, okay, that's a newer name. Gymnasium. Okay, do you know, we're big into prefixes because it helps you to better understand biology. You can understand prefixes. Do you know what gymno means? Naked. How in the world did that ever start out as a gymnasium? Well, back in the Roman times, gymnasiums were places where men performed athletic events naked. And women weren't allowed to be there, but men performed naked. And so the place where this happened was the gymnasium. We have to be careful that lower grade students don't decide that they want to make the gymnasium the real gymnasium. Okay, that's the problem. But so gymnosperms have naked seeds. They don't have anything really protecting their seed, except for the fact that a lot of these are conifers, which means that those seeds are inside the cones, like pine and other evergreens that have. So the conifers in the ginkgo tree are a type of gymnosperm. And the next chapter, so if this is 31 is fungi, isn't it? Who has the fungi you're doing? I don't think we've gotten that one yet. The outline for fungi, have we? I did put the last one on, 35, yes, 35. This angiosperm category, there's a whole chapter 35 that really is about, more specifically about them. There are two groupings of angiosperms, and they're called monocots and dicots. And monocots are like corn, like lilies. If you look at their leaves, they have parallel veined leaves, you know, side by side, running up like this. The dicots have like either like a feather veins like a feather, you have the central one, and then they go off at angles, or palmate like this. That you've got the main vein here, and then it goes off, and like a maple tree, maple leaf. That's a dicot type of leaf pattern. But really what the cot part stands for is the term cotyledon. And the cotyledon refers to the seed leaves, which end up being like seed coats. And what you find, like with a bean, you can divide it into two halves, like a lima bean. You kind of have like two sides to it. That's a dicot. Whereas corn kernels are really just one. And you'll see that the veins in the corn leaves are parallel. Those are monocots and dicots, and you're saying, this is crazy, why do I need to know this? I'll never have to apply this. Well, yes, if you're going in and majoring in whatever, this is going to make a difference. But also if you own a home and you have a yard to take care of, and you are picky about your yard and you want weed-free. Okay, let's define a weed.
Unwanted plants.
An unwanted plant. And it can be a really pretty plant, it can be a wonderful plant, but if it's out of place, it can be called a weed. And wildflowers could be called weeds too, even though they're beautiful. You know, but particularly if it's like clover that's blooming in your yard, or you're having some other type of broadleaf growing in your monocot grassy yard. Grass blades have parallel vein, and they also have a fibrous root system. You know, when you go to pull a clump of grass up, it has all of these sort of like this fibrous root system that's hard to pull. Whereas a lot of these broadleafs, the dicots, will have a like taproot, a main root, and then a few coming off here. So, long story short, yes.
Those little like balls that show up in your yard.
Dandelions.
Okay, but I thought dandelions were the yellow flowers.
They start yellow and then they mature that way.
The older they
Alrighty
get, they
then.
turn white, and then I'm glad you brought them up, because one of the issues with plants is how do I make my range of growing further? Each one of those little white things that come off the aged dandelions, the air picks them up, and it carries them. Far from, it can be if it's windy, like today, if they were out. It carries them someplace else. Or if they happen to land on a bird, and the bird flies, and then it can drop on the ground far away from it, and you have
More dandelions.
more dandelions. Seed dispersal, the big issue. How do I increase my range if I'm a plant? And it depends upon what kind of plant it is, but dandelions are air dispersed. And they've got a pretty good plan there. But getting rid of dandelions. And then the new one that is the sedgeweed, which is more of a yellow, green, thicker type of leaf. The sedgeweed has another name to it too.
Nutsedge.
Nutsedge, yes. That's so hard to get rid of. And in fact, they say when you pull it, you actually may increase more of them coming in. But that's so hard to get rid of. So why am I saying all this? If you're a bad ecologist, and I'm saying this was tongue in cheek, okay? If you're a bad ecologist, not worried about the environment, what do you do when you see this stuff in your nice yard? You try to kill it with what?
Roundup.
Roundup.
And then it kills you. That's not a joking matter, but, or you go to your Lowe's or your Home Depot, your hardware store, and you walk into the herbicide, you know, plants are, you know, like herb, okay, herbicides, and then you have insecticides, and anything side, of course, kills. So you look at all of these different herbicides, and then you have to read to see what for a reason. They are pollinators. When they go to the flowers and they walk over the flowers, they get pollen over their bodies. And then they fly to other flowers. And so the pollen gets knocked off onto the female parts of the plants, and you have the pollination, which then leads to a double fertilization, and that increases. But this has been a hard winter because we've had a lot of extreme cold. And we're worried about the insect population being killed off too much. And along with the insect population, the honeybees and the pollinators we're worried about, and whether or not we're going to have enough of those left. So the whole ecology is a very sensitive thing, and we're going to be learning more about ecology in the last section too. But so there's an overview just from that slide, just from this chalkboard slide of the whole big picture. So let's put this one up. Let's see what we've got here. This is from Corinne's. What did I add? Some of these I don't get much added. I wanted to bring mycorrhizae in. Mycorrhizae are fungal associations with roots of plants. They're symbiotic relationships. Mycorrhizae, myco, anything myco sounds fungal. Like mycology is the study of fungi. So mycorrhizae are very important, particularly if you're going to cultivate orchids or something like that. If you don't have the right mycorrhizal association on the going to grow. So for a lot of plants, they help to retain moisture, one of the things, and they are can be really important. And I kind of did this whole thing over here, what we did there. Bryophytes need to be moist because that's how they reproduce. Their flagellated sperm actually have to swim. So they're low growing, and when it's wet, then that can happen. But, so they're sort of like that transitional land plant. They're almost like the amphibian of the animal world. They're sort of on land, but they're tied to water to reproduce. Most of them. So let's see what the next page was. On the visuals that I put on Blackboard for you, I've given you the life cycle of the moss and the life cycle of the fern. And I would like for you to study those, to see the differences. And I've got the dominant gametophyte, mosses and non-vascular plants have life cycles dominated by gametophytes. And then down here it says ferns and other seedless vascular plants were the first plants to grow tall. Xylem and phloem. And xylem can also have tracheids. They have different components to the xylem. And the evolution of roots that absorb water and nutrients. And the evolution of leaves, which are the primary photosynthetic organ. The three main organs of a plant are roots, stems, and leaves. And there's really four if you're an angiosperm.
Flowers.
Flowers. So of those four, which one of those four is the reproductive part?
Flowers.
The flowers. They have the stamens and the pistils. So the flower is the reproductive part of the angiosperm. Okay, since this has been a practical day, I'm trying to pull in some practical information from this. I'm not sure, I don't think we talked about it before. What's the biological difference? Not the produce department difference, but what's the biological difference and distinction between a vegetable and a fruit? You want to say it? Seeds. Seeds in what? The fruit or the vegetable?
Seeds are fruit.
Seeds in the fruit. Okay. Here's the easy way. If it's the vegetative part of the plant, which means it doesn't reproduce, it's either a root or a stem. Those are vegetables. If you are eating, and here's a definition you might want to catch, a ripened or mature ovary, usually with seeds. If you're eating a ripened, mature ovary with seeds, which came from the flower, you are eating a fruit. Well, like I said, the produce department of grocery stores do not follow the biological definitions. For instance, how about a cucumber?
It's fruit.
It's really a fruit. It's got seeds in it. It came from the flower. The yellow flowers that come on it, they then start growing into the cucumbers. How about a tomato?
Fruit.
Fruit.
It's really a
Has little
fruit.
yellow flower on it, and then it turns into tomatoes.
Exactly. Zucchini, the same way. Yes, a ripened or mature ovary? Yeah. Is that what you're saying? Okay, so a fruit, a ripened or mature ovary, which comes from flowers.
Does this mean like rhubarb is considered a vegetable?
It is a vegetable. It is a vegetable because, no, it's not the root, it's the stem. It's the colorful stem. While I'm on rhubarb, another practical point. Never eat the leaves.
Poison.
They're poisonous. You only eat the stems of a rhubarb plant. Okay, how about corn?
I'm not getting in that.
It's a fruit.
Fruit.
I guess, yeah, technically it's the buds.
Yeah. How many of you know what the male part of a corn plant is and the female part of the corn plant?
Is the part where you detach it, is that the male part? Like the handle on the bottom of it?
Well, let's go back to when it starts forming the ears, the husk that goes over the ears. Okay, you've got the tassels on top. The tassels are the male part. The pollen is in the tassels. And then when you start to have the ears forming, you have the silk. That you peel off your corn when you prepare it. That silk is the female part. So, and then it produces corn. So now you know your vegetables from your fruits. See how much practical
corn is
information? See, this is all good dinner time conversation with whoever you eat. You say, did you know?
Did you know corn's actually
you know?
a fruit?
Are you eating a fruit or are you eating a vegetable? Okay, and then the second page of 29. Spores can either be homosporous, which means the male, they have one type of spore, and they act in both ways, male and female. And heterospores, hetero means other, so you have well-defined two types of spores. And in plant terminology, anything with megaspore, mega in it, because we know that females are the most mega. You're supposed to laugh. We know that's not true. Okay. But megaspores are female and microspores are male. Megaspores and microspores. I really was joking. Sorry. Didn't mean to offend anybody. Didn't mean anything by it. Classification of seedless vascular. And then there's a picture in there of the Carboniferous forest that was 359 to 299 million years ago. And it had all kinds of ferns, it had all kinds of these seedless vascular plants. You remember it, right? Anyway, as all of that decomposed, and when it died, when it decomposed, and then with the increased pressure on the Earth, during all those millions of years, what formed from the decomposition of all of that back then? Coal and our petroleum products. You know, so they really came from plants. So we can go back to talking about food. There's so much that we count on plants for, because plants are our original source of food. They generate the sugars by photosynthesis, which we either eat plants or we eat an animal that eats the plants. And remember, you lose 90% of the energy at each food chain level. Remember, we got that from the last section. You only get 10%. So if you have a large population of people to feed, more efficient to feed them or something plant-based rather than to put money and time into cows and things of that sort. Okay, in chapter 30, we're supposed to be starting here, plant diversity. The seed, it talks about its embryo as food supply surrounded by a protective coat. Seeds and pollen grains are key adaptations for life on land. It talks about other. And Brooke, thank you for this. This outline is a lengthy outline. And it tells you, I mean, it's easy to follow all of this. This talks more about the spores of rule among seed plants, integument. This is just an overview right at the moment. Here's the ovule I mentioned in our conversations. Pollen grain, the microspore develops into this, consists of the male gametophyte. So the pollen grain actually has male gametophyte in it. Pollination is the transfer of pollen. The fertilized ovule pollen grain germinates, giving rise to the pollen tube, then discharging sperm into the female gametophyte within the ovule, down at the bottom of the ovary. They actually do call it an ovary at the base of the flower. Pollen grain can be carried by winged animals, eliminating the water for sperm transport. The evolutionary advantage of seeds, I've kind of talked about it, but there it is in writing. Gymnosperms bear naked seeds, typically on cones. Talks about the life cycle of a pine tree. And so where are we going? Early seed plants and the rise of gymnosperms. And the shape of the flower. If the shape of the flower changes, sometimes pollinators, those pollinators with certain traits become before, because they can get down to the nectar and better than they used to, so sometimes there's coevolution. Angiosperm diversity, monocots, dicots. EU means true, eudicots, true dicot. And then we're going to, in chapter 35, we're going to get into more of the characteristics of angiosperms, the anatomy of the actual plants, root stems and leaves, flowers. Today's crops are the product of artificial selection. Source of wood, threats to plant diversity, things that human beings are doing. So I don't mean for that to be that fast. This is an overview. We're going to continue and then go on to chapter 35 soon. That really is a good jump start for this. Question, yes?
Do you have a football Friday?
Yes, we do. And it just kind of says it could be over anything we've already discussed.
So like bacteria through like plant diversity one.
Yes. And anything we talked about in class. So the definition of a fruit, vegetable, and things like that too. Okay.